Guys, today Adrian Bowe joins Both Sides podcast. Welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, gents. Thanks. I really appreciate you having me on.
All right. So look, the fact is, our podcast is predominantly real estate agents, and
Yes.
everyone's going to know who you are. So everyone knows what you do currently, but I think a lot of the younger agents don't actually understand some information about from when you actually started. I actually only found out yesterday that you worked directly alongside John McGrath. Is that right?
Yeah.
I had no idea. So
Yes.
Can we bring it right the way back from when you first started your career up until now and give us a bit of a rundown?
Sure. Yeah, so that was back in 89, was my first year in
89.
real estate. I left school in 88 and straight into it. I did start here actually in the city initially as a stockbroker, just running around doing, work around the 20 Bond Street, which was the stock exchange at that time. And it was not digital then, so it was all like chalkies. So they were basically just chalking up the stock prices, and then you'd have to run down to the office and then get a buy tip or a sold tip, and then run it back down and up. So it was pretty interesting times back then. And then that lasted, quite a few months, almost a year, and then there was a big correction in the market then. I think they called it Black Friday at the time.
Yeah.
So I was earning like $150 a week, which is quite interesting. I always had an appetite to go to university, but I didn't at that particular point. Ended up doing like a master's degree later in life. So at that point, when that all happened, I ended up just at my brother's office. He was working in sales in Maroubra at the time, and I ended up starting there as an assistant property manager, because in those days there was no verticals within teams. So you know how now with sales you've got a business manager, an EA, a buyer's agent or an associate agent, and even in property management you've got a leasing person, new business person, property manager. Back then it was like, if you were under the age of pretty much 30 or 20, say 27, 28, it'd just be property management, and then when you hit a certain age it'd just be sales. So you're either a property manager or a standalone sales agent. There wasn't much difference in terms of verticals in between each of those business units, So started doing quite a lot of leasing and property management, chasing arrears, all that sort of stuff, and then developed an appetite for commercial property. So ended up in Double Bay, making a career pretty much in my early 20s on Oxford Street, anywhere from Hyde Park all the way through to Queen Street, Wallaris. That's quite a huge strip on Oxford Street.
How long ago was that?
Oh, that's going back early 90s now.
Early 90s, yeah, wow.
And in those days, guys...
Is this with McGrath?
This was with McGrath at the time, yeah. And in those days, what used to happen was, just to get your foot in the door for a shop, you would have to pay key money. So that you weren't buying a business, you were just literally paying anywhere between $200,000 to say $600,000 cash just to get the key for a shop, because there was such a huge shortage. And then you'd be paying at least $4,000 a week. So in those days, we were making good fees, because we were charging a percentage of the key money and a percentage of the annualised gross rental of the first term of the lease.
It's not a bad double dip.
Yeah, which was interesting, and I made a lot of friendships and connections in people in hospitality. So people that nightclubs, bars, pubs, all still good relationships and friendships today. So developed that. So that was pretty interesting. Your early to mid 20s, meeting all those type of people, and obviously leasing out nightclubs and bars and cafes and things like that. That was pretty cool. Yeah. And then ended up just seeing that if you're serious about commercial, you really had to be in the CBD, because things were starting to change a little bit. So I did a short stint in the CBD, but that wasn't really for me. So they went back into residential at McGrath. So look, I started in McGrath back in 94. It was John had only started the business then, a couple of years before that. So I was sort of one of the founding members, if you like, and then was fortunate enough to be a shareholder, and then going through an IPO. There's not many people that sort of go through an IPO in your life, and it was just around the corner here where you ring the bell and all that sort of cool stuff. So that was interesting, and and then did 26 years there, and since then I've sort of developed my own consulting coaching business, but still involved in residential real estate now with a Ray White franchise. So, but my coaching business is completely brand agnostic. I've worked literally with every single brand in Australia and some in New Zealand as well. So that was how it all started.
What was the mindset like back when you were first starting in the commercial space? Were you always entrepreneurial based, or did that develop?
It's a very, very, very good question, because I was quite academic at school, and unfortunately back then that the studies weren't amortised over a 2-year period. Like, they just had the HSC, and at the end of the day, you lived or died by that. So I was an A-grade student all the way up to the HSC, and then that week of the HSC, I ended up with glandular fever and then chronic fatigue syndrome, and was completely wiped out. So ended up failing the HSC.
Oh, wow.
But I always had a dream of studying finance, going and working in the financial markets. And in fact, I did it as work experience in year 10, and that's why I ended up working at the stock market, because after year 10 work experience, that particular firm, who was owned by a guy called Rene Rivkin, which you guys are probably too young to know, but he was the guy in the stock market, back in the sort of late 80s, most of the 90s. And I worked there every single school holidays, year 11 and 12, and they had a job waiting for me. And then I was going to do university part-time and all. So it's interesting how you plan your life out. But if that happened today, for example, where a year 12 student got really sick or whatever, they would just amortise what their performance was like over year 11 and 12, and they would be gracious and obviously give you a fair mark. But that's not the way it was back then. So unfortunately, I had to start as a runner in that company, and not have the ability to go to university. But later in life, after I had some degree of success in real estate, I applied to do a master's degree without doing an undergraduate degree. And given I had quite a lot of experience and some success, I got accepted and ended up completing a Master of Business, so an MBA effectively.
Wow. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. So that was while I was like number one agent at McGrath and running an office, and it was that again was the second tranche of burnout though. So that
really,
because what happens is if you've ever had glandular fever once, it's known as a virus called the Epstein-Barr virus, okay? And basically, without getting medical or scientific, but I have a fascination with medicine, the Epstein-Barr virus effectively stays in your system for the rest of your life.
Wow.
And it can turn into chronic fatigue syndrome or post-viral syndrome if you ever get run down. So the first time it happened was during my HSC. Second time it happened was during that time where I was working 6 days a week, then did my master's degree. So I was doing that on Sundays, where delusionally I thought I was going to do it at weeknights or whatever, but it never worked out that way. Ended up number one agent a few times at McGrath, but that was one time. Was running 2 offices. So, yeah, not ideal. So, a lot of people see it as a curse. I see it as a blessing, because from now on, I live my life in a quite healthy, balanced way, because I'd never want to go back there again, because once that happens to you, you basically get wiped out for 3 months,
3 months?
Yeah, it can happen. So you've got to be really careful about what you do. But these days, I'm a bit of a biohacker, so, there's certain, I probably take about 30 supplements a day.
30
I'm
a day?
I'm on a vitamin C intravenous drip once a month. And I'm also doing B shots, which I give to myself. I'm on primotestone, which is like a testosterone booster, but a natural, which is you just end up with lower levels when you've been through something like that. So, and I'm not a massive drinker. I drink socially just to enjoy, but back in those days, I obviously meeting a lot of people in that nightclub partying industry. You can imagine someone in their, mid to late 20s with access to, a lot of resources to have fun with. I had a really good time, and I didn't get married till I was almost 40. So, and I'm very happily married now. And
So your body's been through a bit.
Yeah, it has. So there was on 3 occasions I went to complete burnout.
Yeah.
So
When you say complete, sorry.
yeah, go for it.
When you say complete burnout, what do you mean by complete burnout?
Look, you've heard the cliche when people say you burn the candle at both ends.
Yeah.
Yeah. So working hard, partying hard.
Yeah, okay.
Basically, that's what it is.
Yeah.
And again, if you've got this Epstein-Barr virus, which in America they call it mono disease or mononucleosis,
Yeah.
it's got a nickname as the kissing disease. A lot of people don't know, but the reality is you probably got about 80% of the population of in developed countries anyway walking around with Epstein-Barr virus
Really?
in their system. You can get a blood test and check, but it's dormant. Most
Yeah.
people, it's just dormant. So if anyone's ever had tonsillitis or anything like that in the past, you most likely have got the dormant Epstein-Barr virus. It just means you've got to be super careful, and you just don't want to burn yourself out. And it's always good to avoid certain amount of foods as well. Like dairy, sugar, wheat, yeast, stuff like that.
So how do you avoid that then? Because obviously I can, based on this 10, 15 minutes we've already been talking, I can tell that you've made a lot of sacrifices through your life. You've worked a lot, and it seems like 7 days a lot of the time.
Yeah.
How do you reach the level of success that you've hit without doing that and without burning out?
It's a very good question, and to be honest with you, I don't know a lot of people who have achieved pinnacle success, because there's degrees of success, but I'd say pinnacle success without making sacrifices, to be honest with you. And, you could talk to anyone like Matt Steinway, for example, Josh Teslon, any of these guys, they'll tell you, and they're both good friends of mine, and I know personally their stories. And Matt, for example, did nothing for 20 years but just real estate and worked his butt off, and he had an interesting, colourful past before that, and now he's grown a fantastic business. But he's found balance. He's found balance in his life now. But yeah, definitely also went along that path of burnout. So look, that's not very encouraging to hear if you're a younger person. That there's no doubt about it. However, that's only my reference and my experience because I'm of a certain age group, okay? And I would have thought that with technology, with process, with more efficiencies, with bigger teams, etc., I actually think it is possible to achieve pinnacle success without burnout. And frankly, that's a lot of what I teach in a lot of my consulting and coaching. And I often am quoted as saying to people like younger people like you guys that are in the business, I've paid the stupidity tax on your behalf already. I've paid that stupidity tax. So trust me, it's unnecessary. If success takes 1 or 2 years longer, that's okay. It's just not necessary, because when you make those sort of sacrifices, there's absolutely no doubt that there's areas of your life that get cannibalized. Because if you look at it, you've got work, you've got spirituality, you've got family, you've got relationships, you've got health, and you've got mindset, right? There's no doubt that if you just focus on one of those, the rest of them will be affected. There's absolutely no doubt about it. Now, a lot of people talk about work-life balance. I also think, on the other end of the spectrum, that is a bit of a myth also, work-life balance. I think it's a bit of a misnomer. And I think it's more about work-life harmony, and it's also about what chapter of your life you're at. It's actually okay to make sacrifices if you've chosen to do that. Like Josh is a good example. He's chosen a certain stage of his career to make sacrifices, but the next stage, which will involve a child and whatever, there'll probably be less sacrifices, And same with me, I chose to make sacrifices. I look back and I've got references though, and references that I can associate either pain or pleasure with as well. So there's nothing that motivates you more than associating pain to something that you never want to go back there again, or pleasure where you do want to go back there again. So all people's references are based on either associating pain or pleasure with something. So, for the younger audience, you don't need to burn out. You can have work-life harmony. Just don't kid yourself that it's going to be work-life balance, and also don't kid yourself that there's not going to be some sacrifice. But as long as it's a willing sacrifice and a determined sacrifice and something that you've planned for and you know how long it's going to go for, then I think that's okay.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I get a little bit deeper and ask your perspective on something that I've currently been going through, where it relates to your incident where you hit this burnout, which you hadn't planned for?
Yes.
And let's say we've got a plan and an understanding of what goals we want to hit, but then an obstacle like that comes in and it throws us off course. So for example, my situation, I've been sick for 5 weeks. I've been in and out of getting testing, bad stomach, etc., etc. How, when something like that comes into the game, how do you navigate that to still maintain a mindset? Do you adjust the goals? Do you have to become more resourceful?
Yes.
How did you balance that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I heard a story once. There were two guys, Cass and Jonesy, I think it were, who they canoed from New Zealand to Australia. And there was just one of those tiny canoes, just the two of them, right? And it took, I think it was 40 days or something.
Surprised they even made it.
Yeah. And all they had was nothing really, just like a sat phone in case they ever wanted to quit. And when they finally got to their journey, only young guys, like private school boys here from Sydney, they were like, so did you ever want to quit? And they said, actually, quite a few times. And they said, why didn't you? And what did you do? And they said, what we did is made the decision that rather than quitting, for the next 48 hours, we were going to paddle at 80% instead of 100%, right? So they still reached their goal, but they actually paddled at 80%. So the metaphor for us is no one really noticed that it took them a little bit longer or whatever. So I think if we're going through something that deserves our attention, such as health, family, relationships, financial issues or whatever, which is inevitable, by the way. Like life is not fair. Life is life, right? It's easy to say, oh, this is not fair, this has happened to me and whatever. But what you could do, for example, is your business doesn't have to be totally affected. You could, to use the metaphor, paddle at 80% for the next month just to get your health on track because it's a priority, you know. And if it is gut related, I've actually been there as well, right? And I know Matt Steinway talks a lot about gut health and he's on this massive journey.
I just started with Mick the Podman yesterday.
Yeah, good. Yeah, so it's a bit of a secret what he puts in those pods, but at the end of the day, that's one factor of it, okay? So my recommendation, and I'm giving you advice, but
please,
I'm sure this is a good forum for everyone, is you know, the very first thing you want to do is a stool analysis, okay, for a couple of reasons. One is if there's any parasites in your system, no matter how many supplements you take, no matter how much you rest, no matter whatever you do, unless you kill those parasites, the side effects are just incredible. They're just absolutely incredible. The second part of it is to do an analysis on the colony of your microbiome, because there's literally trillions of different bacteria, good and bad, that need to live in that microbiome. And you're basically doing like an X-ray on that microbiome, and you want to see that it's actually flourishing with a lot of different bacteria. So to tell you my story with gut health, it was the worst possible story that could happen. Is that you know, I had a lot of issues, got tested, and I did have parasites. Okay. And the normal protocol is that you take 3 forms of antibiotics. So they're pretty.
I had the H. pylori virus. Is that something similar?
Yeah. It is a form of bacteria. Yeah. So the normal protocol is you take antibiotics. You know, 3 different types of them for like 10 to 14 days. And most people tolerate antibiotics, right? But as we know, antibiotics are a bit like chemotherapy in that they don't discriminate whether they kill good or bad cells in your body. That's what chemo does. That's why people lose their hair, etc., because it's killing your good and bad cells. So with your gut, what antibiotics do is kill all the bad bacteria, but also the really good bacteria, and that's why you hear often people talk about you should be taking a lot of probiotics, right?
Yes, that's
either
what I heard.
during or after or whatever.
Yeah.
And some doctors will say, well, don't take it during probiotics. That's not necessarily true, even though I'm not a doctor, but I'm actually obsessed with medicine. As long as you take it 2 hours away, it's not gonna have any issues. But so the worst possible scenario is that what happens is you end up with SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which basically means you're completely depleted of your good bacteria, completely depleted, and the bad bacteria takes over because of those antibiotics, and you end up with something called Clostridium difficile, right?
Wow.
And that's what happened to me. So that is not a good place to be in, right? If you go far down that path, you can actually end up having what's called a fecal transplant, which is not great, right? But luckily for me, there's a medication which is called vancomycin, which ended up killing that, but actually 2 years later ended up getting the parasites back again. But what the specialist at St Vincent's actually suggested is, instead of taking oral antibiotics, because obviously I was susceptible to what's Clostridium difficile or C. diff, they conduct like a normal colonoscopy and use liquid antibiotics to flush it out of your system that way. So that way it's directly target. It's like a nuclear bomb directly targeting. A bit like when someone gets a cortisone injection in the shoulder, rather than taking oral cortisone, which has a lot of side effects, they'll just go straight into the shoulder. So that's what happened to me. So anyway, it's not a great topic about real estate, guys, but it's an important one because
Yeah, it is.
gut health. So from now on, my gut health plan is I'm taking probiotics, prebiotics, slippery elm, aloe vera. I avoid certain foods. Like, my protocol is pretty strict because of that history, and I've got that susceptibility for it. And really, I'm not meant to be taking antibiotics. So, not ideal if I end up with a tooth infection or a toe infection or anything like that, because I've got a susceptibility towards antibiotics. And look, people do overprescribe antibiotics, especially medical doctors these days. But before penicillin or antibiotics were invented, in the 50s and 60s, people were dying just of ammonia and stuff. So they've got a place, but unfortunately they've been way overprescribed, and now that's why you're talking about superbugs and things like that are immune from antibiotics. So it's interesting, but I see it as a blessing because I always looked after my body. Since then, I'd never had the flu shot. So when COVID hit, I was very, very fortunate to avoid the vaccine, because it was like, I never had to take the flu shot. Why should I take a vaccine, especially if it's like untested? I'm quite out. A lot of people know that I'm quite outspoken about things that to do with pro-choice, and that's one of them.
You're on the right
obviously
page.
The lockdowns and all that sort of stuff, which is, I'm quite outspoken about that. It's very controversial, I get it, but look, it is what it is.
We're on the same page.
Anyway, so that's a bit of a health sort of vertical there, tangent that we've gone on, but I'm glad you asked.
But it's true, because that base level, everything comes from health, right? If you don't have health, you can't do anything. I remember 2 years ago, I broke my leg. Couldn't go out to listing appointments. It's obviously different to gut health and what have you, but without your health, you can't perform at the right level.
Yeah.
And that's where I've seen agents like, for example, Alexander Phillips, Josh Teslin's obviously been on a health journey and what have you. And that's what you start to see is when you look at all the top agents, they're all fit, they're all healthy, they're all looking after themselves. Because without that, you can't perform. 100%.
I'd say at some stage, though, they probably weren't and had to make sacrifices
true.
and learnt the hard way, So, I think, I don't know if that metaphor makes sense, paddle at 80%.
It does.
Where the market or your business probably won't know what's going on, but you could actually just work at 80%, to use the same metaphor, focus on your health, get that back on track, rather than quitting, which is what those boys, rather than quitting, they were like, well, let's just paddle at 80%. So interesting metaphor. But part of your question also was like, what happens, when you get punched in the face? Everything's going fine, but then you get punched in the face. Like, I've had a bunch of adversity, man, happen to me. Like I had a very public, sort of exit from a certain business, and that was something that was well publicised, and the media sort of had a bit of fun with that. That's not good for your headspace. No one wants to go through anything like that. But you just got to put one foot in front of the other, focus on what you're good at, and at the end of the day, you end up with just better references, because you've been through adversity. So adversity is definitely something that most successful people have been through, whether it's financial, health, marital, whatever it is. It is almost a prerequisite for success.
But usually what happens is when you have these setbacks that you've seen, most people just go down.
Yeah.
They don't ever recover. So we've actually got a viewer question here that relates. We've got Edward Brown that's actually asked a question as longevity. How have you kept longevity in the business, especially with all the controversies you've been through? But it always seems like you've come out better than what you were before. How have you done that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I do feel that, as cliche as outcomes or goals are, that they're very important to have. But in saying that, I don't feel that medium to long-term goals have much use, to be honest with you, because I had this plan for myself, to go to university, for example, and that didn't happen. I had a job lined up, university to go, and that didn't happen. And then I had this other plan where I was at a certain business for 26 years, and then that was going to end up a certain way, and then that stopped. So I think it's very hard to create 5-10 year goals, for example. I think if you can live life in monthly and annual compartments, I genuinely feel that's probably as good as it's going to get for you, because it's very overwhelming if I said to you, okay, Kevin, mate, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I know that's a common question people ask at job interviews or whatever. It's like, geez, that seems a bit overwhelming, and to be honest, if you put it out there and you're not there, did you fail? Is it a disappointment? I don't necessarily think so. So, look, that's probably a little bit a contrarian view to most people, where they're like, oh, you need goals, 5-10 years, all that sort of stuff. That's all nice and idealistic until you've been in that position, you get punched in the face and it doesn't work out exactly that way, and therefore you have to pivot, you have to recalibrate. So for me, I think, to answer the question in terms of longevity, have more shorter term goals, but also feeling on purpose. Yeah. And what I mean by that is, if you wake up every day and you genuinely feel like you're on purpose and you're doing what you should be doing, then it's easier to create longevity in your life, because it's not like you're waking up and you're thinking, shit, I can't believe I've got to do this again today. Now, in saying that, we can't be idealistic either, and most of your audience are in real estate or buyer's agency, right? So the bottom line is, there will be parts of your role that you'll have to tolerate, right? But if you dislike them or resent them or hate what parts of what you're doing, that's not good. That's not a good sign, okay? So the majority of the time in your business or your role, you should feel on purpose, okay? And let's call it 80%. The other 20%, you should be tolerating it and just seeing it as a means to an end to achieve what you want to achieve. So an example in buyer's agency, in your case, for example, might be, well, I don't exactly like having multiple conversations with buyers that are not qualified to find that out, but I tolerate that because it's a means to an end to actually doing a deal with someone who is qualified and making them feel really good and getting at a great outcome. Or Kevin, in your case, you don't exactly like dealing with a really difficult vendor who is overpriced, unmotivated. You work on it for 3 months and you have to hand the keys back. That's not great.
No.
But you tolerate it because it's a means to an end to, the following month selling 3 auctions in a row on a Saturday and whatever, and making 6 stakeholders, buyers, sellers, in all those transactions feel fantastic and achieve their life dream, for example. That's being on purpose, right? But then again, I reckon there's a lot of people working in corporate Australia or blue collar Australia who probably hate actually what they're doing. If it's corporate Australia, they're jumping on a train, they're sitting in a cubicle, they're working on spreadsheets, they've got accountability and governance, like you wouldn't believe, and that's hard to create longevity if you're doing that. So, can your purpose evolve? The answer is yes. So for me, I found a lot of purpose for a long time in listing, selling, negotiating, etc. I still enjoy that. Not every part of it, maybe not the cold calling or the prospecting side, but do I feel on purpose today adding value and developing agents and working with EBUs and identifying gaps and leakages within their business, and then getting a message saying, Bowie, I implemented this, or I did that, or I used that dialogue, or I used that process, and my business has doubled. Like that's amazing. Yeah. That feels on purpose.
Can we talk a bit about your coaching? I actually had coffee with one of my mates, and I said, I'm doing a podcast with Adrian tomorrow. He goes, Adrian, he's one of my coaches.
Oh, right.
And he goes, the way he coaches is very different because it's very holistic. So the way that you coach, what's different about the way that you go about it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there's actually not that many real estate coaches in Australia when you think about it. You can count them on one hand, all very good at what they do. And some businesses and agents use me and sometimes them as well, which is fine. Look, I think the main point of difference is I don't know any other coach that for 30 years straight sold over 100 properties a year, every year on year, despite market conditions. I'm not saying that to impress anyone, but to impress the importance of earning respect from agents because of being in the trenches for 3 decades, and going from zero database to building a database, building a team, being a franchisee, being a franchisor, being a executive of a publicly listed company, having my own consulting business. So there's a lot of references there that I've got. And when you say holistic, it's an interesting description they've provided there, and it's flattering because, yes, I do like to go deep and granular. Like for me, coaching is not putting a motivational quote on a screen and then people feeling good for 5 minutes or 2 days and then going back to their old habits. That's not coaching. To me, coaching is okay, why are you stuck? What's the blockage? Is it the story you're telling yourself? Is it the strategy or lack thereof? Is it the state you're in, energy-wise? Or is it a lack of skills? Usually it's one or all of those 4 things. And those 4 S's for me are really important because once I peel back the onion layer and actually get a bit deeper, I'll find that it's one or all of those things. And the most common one is the story they're telling themselves. Either it's a fear of failure, fear of success, fear of rejection, whatever it might be. But sometimes it is a fundamental lack of skills and they just haven't been shown or taught the right way, and that's fine. But it can be a bit polarising too. So there's a lot of people, not a lot, but I would say maybe 10% of the people that I've worked with in the past and say, Adrian, look, you're very direct. You've made me feel quite vulnerable because you've really exposed my shortcomings. And I'm like, well, that's my job. That's my job. Yeah, that's why I'm here. I'm not here to just make you feel good and give you fluffy motivational quotes. So let's find out what the gap is, because if we get this right, we can actually change your life, not just physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, but in all aspects of your life, and you can live a much better life. And really, real estate is a game and a platform that if you're good at, actually funds and determines your real life. Now, your real life is actually your health, your spirituality, your family, your friends, your partner, your spouse, etc. Right? Yeah. So not saying that real estate is a game in the sense to be cavalier about the industry, not at all, but it really is a game in the sense that if you know the rules of it really, really well, and you don't take things too seriously or too personally, and you protect your inner citadel, which the Stoics talk about, and I do include Stoicism a lot in my coaching. You know, I'm a big believer in Stoicism. Then, if you deal with those things, you'll find that your real life, which is, you know, family, spirituality, health, friends, social, etc., it can be in a much better place. Yeah.
What's been the biggest shift in your life that's contributed to fulfillment?
I would say, when you talk about a shift, I would say evolution. And I think unless you're evolving, then you're probably dying, you know. A bit like nature, you know, unless you're growing, you're dying. So I don't think it's a great strategy for people to remain static or in inertia. So what I mean by that is, you know, you constantly need to be evolving and improving. And Tony Robbins has got a great acronym for it, CANI, which is constant and never-ending improvement. So that can be incremental though. Like if today happened and tomorrow you were just an incremental better version of yourself, either professionally or personally, or as a father or as a husband or a wife or whatever, then that's good, right? But if you've gone backwards and haven't evolved and are not feeling on purpose, you need to take an X-ray on yourself and just see if this is really what you should be doing. So, you know, it's a bit like you've evolved because, you know, you were working for a different buyer's agent, now you got your own company. So what's next? It doesn't really matter what's next, but as long as that trajectory does continue and there is evolution and there is progression, as incremental as that might be. So when we talk about shift, I see that more as evolution. Are you evolving? Are you improving on a daily basis? And it might be incremental. That doesn't mean you're going to have bad days, bad weeks, because you will. That's life, right? Remember I said life is not fair, life is life. And that's going to happen. You're going to have financial issues, health issues, relationship issues. That's just the way that life is designed. And it's a matter of how you evaluate, deal, and interpret those adversities. So this is what the Stoics talk about a lot. So the one of the main Stoic philosophies is life is not about what happens to you, but how you interpret it, okay? Because everyone has different interpretations about what happens to them. And it's very easy to label an adversity as like, oh, why did this happen to me? This means that, you know, I'm not going to be able to do this, that, and the other. Or it's like, okay, that's interesting. What can I learn from it? What's my interpretation? What's the opportunity here? And I'll treat that as a reference now, you know. And another big Stoic philosophy is they talk about, you know, the controllables and the uncontrollables. So it's like, you know, give me the courage to focus on what I can control, provide me the strength to ignore what I can't control, and the wisdom to actually know the difference of which one is which. Do you know what I mean? So that's also a big... But there's a lot more to Stoicism, but basically every modern form of psychotherapy, psychology is based on Stoic philosophy, you know, which is, whether it's cognitive behavioural therapy or psychotherapy, it's all based on, you know, Stoicism, which is, you're talking, you know, was established in 400 BC, you know, so a long time ago. And the great Stoics, which people would probably be most aware of, is Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus. You know, they're the ones, and it's a great study, a great discipline for your viewers to immerse themselves in, because it will help them in all aspects of their lives. Yeah.
Wow.
I've got a question for you. Being at the age you are now, looking down at someone who's my age, 25, what order of operation would you focus on? If you know, like, knowing in your position, would you focus on building your finances first, or spirituality, or relationship, health? Like, how would you order things, or would you go off looking where I currently am and adjusting things slightly, how do you go about creating a model to then manifest things, or do you not want to look too far in the future and you want to kind of how does that make?
It does make sense. It does make sense.
Love to hear your perspective on that.
And what you're basically asking is, what sequential order should my priorities be?
Yeah.
In all the main pillars of life. And my response to you will be, it's going to be different for everyone. And it goes back to what I was saying before about longevity, was what makes you feel on purpose today? Okay, so is focusing on career, does that make you feel on purpose? And this could be an and strategy. It doesn't have to be an or strategy, because a lot of people think it is an or strategy, where it's like, well, if I focus on my career, that means health must be cannibalised. Or if I focus on my career, relationships is just not going to work. It doesn't have to be, but I talked about work-life harmony. It's never going to be balanced. So to say that in all the main pillars of your life, call it spirituality, health, financial, career, etc., it's going to be always balanced. It's just not going to be the case. You're going to have different chapters of your life journey where you're going to feel a little bit more on purpose focusing on one thing, and then the next month or the next year you'll feel a little bit more on purpose doing something else. So my recommendation is, see where your energy's at, see where the frequency is and what you can relate to, and whatever makes you feel on purpose. And when we talk about, okay, well, what makes you feel on purpose? Well, what excites you? So what do you get excited by? If that's business at the moment and a little bit of health and a little bit of relationship, but slightly biased towards business, that's okay. There's no right or wrong. No one's judging you. Because in 3 years' time, it might be the complete opposite that excites you, And I think that's a really long way to also answer Ed's question about longevity is evolving as a person, noticing what excites you and then having a slight bias towards that excitement, okay?
Yeah.
And feeling on purpose, and also not being idealistic that you're going to love every aspect of your work, because you're not. There's going to be, but as long as there's aspects that you can tolerate, but you shouldn't be disliking or resenting parts of your work. If that happens, that's when you start to maybe need to evolve into someone else or something else. Yeah.
So find your frequency and run towards it.
Basically, yeah. And Matt Steinway talks a lot about that. He's written a book about it recently, Frequency, which I think is great. And it's nothing really tangible that you can put your hand on, frequency, but I mean,
you can feel it.
You can feel it, and there's Matt and many others talk about the law of attraction. It was commercialised many years ago by a documentary called The Secret, which people sort of got really excited about. But that actually law of attraction's been around for centuries, and it's effectively what you put out to the universe will come back to you in spades. But you've got to go there first. The
actions have to align.
And sometimes you have to have the courage to. Let's say growing up you wanted to make this money or achieve this goal, but having that creates resistance in the body, and it may not be on purpose to what you truly should be focusing on.
Yes.
I feel sometimes from my experience, sometimes having the courage to allow yourself to change course is also part of it. Have you had an experience?
Yeah,
would you agree or disagree with that?
I 100% agree with that, because if you're feeling off purpose and if you're chasing money or material objects or whatever they might be, you could get there and still not necessarily be satisfied or happy. Like there's a lot of miserable wealthy people, right? And there's a lot of very content people that don't necessarily have much wealth. So that in itself tells you that if you're chasing towards something that you think's going to provide you satisfaction and fulfillment, you'll often get there and think, well, wow, what happens next? Like it's like when in the 60s when Armstrong and Aldrin went to the moon, they literally came back with clinical depression, literally, because it's like, wow, these guys achieved the impossible to get to the moon, and actually no one's done it since, and that was 60 years ago, right? They literally came back with clinical depression because it was like, wow, where do I go through from there? I literally went to the moon and back. So they need, and that they weren't prepared for it. Their team wasn't prepared for it, so they literally had to go through a lot of psychotherapy and even medication to actually get better. So I do genuinely feel that shorter term goals are a lot better than longer term goals, and I genuinely feel that if you're not aligning to something that you're striving for, it's okay to change and pivot and go off course for a while. Like if you need to go to East Asia and find yourself for 6 months, then that's okay. A lot of people a lot of people in a hurry, I think, to achieve this success, quote unquote success. This word success is very myopic in my opinion. That's why whoever described my coaching as holistic, I think that's very accurate because I'll unpack a lot of people's verticals in their life, not just real estate. I'll look at other areas as well.
So you do a lot of coaching and you obviously pick up on a lot of gaps and where people are going wrong. What do you think are the most common mistakes people are making in their own lives, whether it be business or personal? Most common.
Yeah. The most common, in my opinion, would be they don't have a compelling enough purpose. It's been a bit commercialised with Simon Sinek, where he's like, what's your why?
Yeah.
But despite being commercialised, it's very accurate. So if you don't know why you're waking up every day and doing what you're doing, there's no way that you can sit in front of a vendor or a buyer or a team member or whatever it is and have that overwhelming energy and compelling enough story to have people buy and sell through you. That's the bottom line, okay? Because if you're distracted and not feeling on purpose and you're not 100% on what you're doing and you've woken up and you're actually only operating at 40 or 50% because either you had a massive night the night before or you got issues at home or your health's off track or whatever, frankly, you don't deserve to be sitting in front of that client because that client deserves nothing but 100% from you, okay? They're paying you a lot of money. Like this is an industry where you can earn a lot of money if you crack the code. So I think firstly, having a compelling enough purpose. I think that's critical. Secondly, a common pitfall is looking for shortcuts. So especially in real estate, right? Because you've got so many businesses that affiliate with the real estate industry that are either technology businesses or artificial intelligence businesses or whatever, and they'll approach agents and say, look, if you do this, then you'll be able to achieve, success quicker, etc. So they'll default to that shortcut. I'm not saying there's not a place for those products. Don't get me wrong. Like there is a place, but I see them as a complement to traditional hard work, traditional forms of prospecting, traditional forms of listing, selling, negotiating, but if you're looking for shortcuts, you're going to be disappointed because they just do not exist. Because, I've been in this industry 35 years, and let me tell you, the biggest revolution in the 20th century was the internet, so REA and domain, and the biggest revolution in the 21st century was social media. But that's it. Everything else, the fundamentals of prospecting, list, negotiating, selling, is exactly the same 35 years ago that it is today, right? So that's only one major revolution, per century, basically, right? And I think in 10 years, sure, artificial intelligence might play a little bit more a role, technology might play a little bit more of a role, but I still feel that the conduit, being us as either a buyer's agent or a seller's agent, is absolutely necessary. That's why our business and our industry hasn't been disintermediated or hasn't been disrupted, where you look at our equivalents like travel agencies, for example, they've been at least disrupted and in many cases disintermediated altogether. But I don't see that happening in real estate. And there was a lot of talk about it, right? There was a lot of talk about that happening like 10 years ago. But all that happens is that the industry just evolves. So now you've got buyer's agency, which is probably one of the most burgeoning, verticals of the real estate industry. And I think that's great. But at the end of the day, it really is real estate agents' fault for not servicing buyers properly, right?
Spot on.
We should. Where there shouldn't be buyers agents, I'm glad there is, right? But if real estate agents did their job properly, it wouldn't be such a big industry, right? But then you look at the mortgage industry and why that's so burgeoning. So most people would deal with a broker rather than a bank, okay?
Correct.
And you look at technology. You know, I can speak from experience because I'm not a technology native, meaning that I started real estate with no REA, no domain, no email, no internet, no database, no CRMs, nothing, no RP data, nothing. So all technology has done and AI has done is reduce days on market, made the job easier for the agent, and allow the agent to do more volume.
It's true.
That's all it's done. So and now with super teams and efficiencies and EBUs, etc., I just see that being more of a case. And now you've got agent direct models that have evolved. So if I wanted to open a business from scratch 10 years ago, it would have been very, very hard. Now you've got all these agent direct models, or even franchisors are now even offering bespoke models, where if I wanted to open a business tomorrow, I could actually be live within 10 days if I really, really wanted to, right? So there's an evolution in the industry occurring, but not a disruption as such. And if it is a disruption, it's only in our favour as agents and buyers, and actually in the favour of the consumer as well, because it's an easier experience to be a buyer and walk into an open house today, download a strata report or a pest and building straight away, have a contract emailed to you in seconds. Like, you know, I'm talking like when I first got into real estate, you know, someone would walk through the inspection, ask for a contract, you'd put that in the post, they may or may not have got it in 2 days' time. They wanted to do pest and building, you'd organise that. If you wanted to get the property advertised, it wasn't like you just took photos and posted it online. Like you would ring the local paper and then send your material off, and it might or might not appear. Sometimes they just forget to do it in 10, 14 days' time. So everything was just harder. Now it's just easier. So it's a better experience for all stakeholders, buyers, sellers and agents, you know?
It's true.
How has your prospecting plan evolved with the framework of let's set monthly or annual goals?
Yeah.
Because sometimes that's something I'm at the stage now in my thinking is, do we saturate a core area and think 10 years, 5 years down the track? Or do I think about who can I put in my ecosystem that over a month or 12 month I can service? How would you...
Yes.
Does that make... Yeah.
It does make sense. It's a good question. So even though I'm suggesting your goals should be short term, your vision for your career, if you've decided to be in real estate or buyer's agency for the rest of your career, then that needs to be a long-term vision. So you need to be speaking with, meeting with, or prospecting or entering people into your database today that are not necessarily looking to buy or sell, okay? However, if you add value to them over a long period of time with a high degree of frequency, a high degree of adding value, a high degree of trust, then I can tell you through experience that is a commission and a deal and a relationship in 5-10 years time. You know, I've literally have people calling me every week saying, Adrian, I've been getting your newsletter, or you and your team have been calling me for 15 years. I'm actually now ready to do something, you know, and most of that is uncontested business, right? So when they say, as cliche as it sounds, frequency builds trust, it is true.
It's true.
And we even know that through our current campaigns. So if you're not speaking to your vendor every single day, if you're not face-to-face with them every single week, and if you're not submitting offers every single week and flexing their negotiation muscles, we all know that we can get to auction day, or if you're private treaty based, present a really good offer, and they will make a mistake sometimes and say, no, I don't think that's the right offer. I don't feel that we've met the right buyer. I don't feel that the marketing has worked, because you haven't shown enough effort and you haven't built enough trust and rapport with that client to deserve the right to provide what I call indiscriminate news. Because this client is not unfamiliar with indiscriminate news, because when they're dealing with their doctor, lawyer or accountant, those trusted advisors provide good or bad news. It doesn't really matter. But what do they always do and come in over the top? They provide a solution. So if it's a medical example, sure, there's a diagnosis, but here's my prescription to get it sold. If it's your accountant, okay, here's an ATO tax ruling, but here's the solution to get through. So it's okay to sit in front of your vendor after the first Saturday and say, Adrian, we're off track. We did talk about this as being one of the options when we had our set to sell meeting last week. The good news is I've got some recommendations on some levers that we can control in a market where there's a lot of uncontrollables in order to get it back on track. These are my recommendations. Where a lot of agents sometimes have that discussion, but sometimes have it after the second or third week. It's too late. You can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
Or wait to have the tough conversation at the reserve meeting. Well, that's just too late, So I'm not suggesting we go through a conditioning process, but I'm suggesting we go through an education process and be less discriminant on our news and our reporting to the owners. Whether it's good or bad, just provide the news, but always have recommendations there.
Yeah. So you've said obviously selling over 100 properties per year for quite a long time. What's your highlight of your career and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'd say I have a few highlights. We're definitely achieving number one agent at McGrath on multiple occasions was a massive highlight, because in those days that was definitely the breeding ground of the best of the best.
It was the best of the best.
Yeah, still a terrific brand today, and they're still one of my clients today I work very closely with. Very good brand.
But you had like 90% of all the good agents in the eastern suburbs.
Yes,
Sydney were just
yes.
McGrath.
Yeah, absolutely. So a great breeding ground for great talent, no doubt. So to be number one agent on a few occasions when my average sale price was a lot less than a lot of my peers, that was very rewarding, and I would consider that a highlight for sure.
Yep. Would you say that success came from your prospect a system or plan? What was?
Yes. Prospecting. I've always been known to be a very consistent and diligent prospector. So, without fail, in my diary between 8:30 and 10:30. No matter if I was carrying 6 listings or 16, then that 2 hours was dedicated to what I call proactive prospecting, which is nothing to do with prospecting with your current campaigns. So the mistake, and this goes back to your other question, what's one of the most common mistakes agents make is they don't diversify their prospecting activities consistently. So what I mean by that is if they end up with 5 or 6 listings and they're only used to 1 or 2, they'll get consumed into campaign prospecting. Why? Because it's urgent. Like if you don't do callbacks and you don't return buyers' calls and you don't submit offers to your vendor or don't update your vendor or don't turn up to an open house, the ramifications are severe and immediate. But if you've got a database of people own property and you're not calling them on a daily basis, regardless if you've got 6 or 16 listings, then the ramifications are severe, but they're not as immediate. The only reason you don't have enough listings today is because you didn't do enough database non-campaign prospecting 60 to 90 days ago. So when I talk about diversification of prospecting activities, I'm talking about database prospecting, which should include your hot list, chase list. It should include past buyers, past sellers, and it should include pipeline owners that you've met who one of them might have said they're getting carried out in a box, the other one might have said, call me in 2 weeks, I'm ready to sell, and everyone in between, right? Yep. So that's one area. The second one is your campaign work, which we've talked about. The third one is your success marketing, which is, okay, every time I list and sell a piece of real estate, am I following a checklist of 1 to 5 things that I do consistently without fail within 24 to 48 hours of that property being listed and within 24 to 48 hours of that property going unconditional. And that could include cold calling, door knocking, social media, letterbox, whatever it is, but you have to do it as a set and forget, where a lot of agents I speak to, they're like, well, I do that, but I just do it sometimes. It's like, well, that's not going to work. So if you look at your 6-day working week, you can see where those 3 buckets, if you like, can be misaligned, and you can get consumed in one of them instead of focusing on all three of them. And I guarantee that if you do that, you'll have a far more consistent business, and you won't experience that roller coaster ride of income, which unfortunately is very, very common in both industries, I would say, in buyer's agent and seller's agencies. Yeah.
Sweet. What were some other key career highlights for you?
Oh, look, definitely, given I was always a fan of academia, to be able to graduate with a master's degree, even though it's not a career highlight, it's a professional highlight. So being able to actually do that without an undergraduate and you know, spread it out over a few years and study very hard, knowing I always had that pebble in my shoe around academia at school, but unfortunately the way it was set up, I just wasn't able to pass the HSC, therefore wasn't being able to go to university. So that was definitely a professional highlight. I also think, you know, starting my own office, and I've done that twice now, like one in a company-owned environment, and that particular office made it to the number 1 or 2 office within the network within 12 months, you know, within the McGrath network. That was very rewarding due to recruitment and productivity. So that was extremely rewarding. And I would also say probably, you know, launching my consulting coaching business, you know. And I've got a lot of personal highlights, like meeting my wife. We've been married for 12 years. You know, even though it was very late in life, it was a great privilege to be able to share your life with someone where, you know, I left home at 17 and didn't actually live with another human being till 38.
Yeah,
so
wow.
no flatmate, no girlfriend.
Wow.
Like, I actually lived on my own for 21 years.
How was that? Loved it?
Well, I at the time...
The bachelor pad.
Yeah. At the time, I actually thought it was a good thing, and I think I convinced myself of that. But now looking back, it was actually really a lonely existence.
Yeah, okay.
Like,
Fair
you think about it, 21 years. And that was just due to my own little nuances and my own little anxieties and my own little quirkiness about, you know, and you know, really, a lot of people talk about OCD, you know, so a lot of people use that term frivolously and they say it, you know, quite in a cavalier manner. But OCD is actually a clinical diagnosis, you know, and as a lot of people know, I'm an advocate for mental health, only because I've been through mental health issues in the past, and that is my diagnosis, OCD. Yep. So it was very crippling in those days, because people think, oh, OCD, is that when people, like, you know, have to go back and check they didn't leave the stove on or something? It is that, but it's also, like, I look back when I was living on my own, for example, and I was in the height of my OCD diagnosis, I literally couldn't leave to go to work unless my socks were colour-coded. Like, I just, there was something within me that was like, how can you actually go to work unless you don't sort out your sock drawer? Do you know what I mean? So it's, and the other part of OCD is rumination of thoughts, you know, which is you've just got this constant rumination in your mind. And, you know, anyone who's an OCD expert will tell you that is the wolf in sheep's clothing. Yeah. And which a lot of people call the voice in your head. You know, you've got this. So you don't have to suffer from OCD to have the voice in your head. All of us actually have it. It's just that for some people, it's a lot more overwhelming than others. So if anyone's ever watched The Fight Club with Ed Norton and Brad Pitt,
yes, what a movie!
Yeah, so that is the epitome of the wolf in sheep's clothing, or the shadow, if you like, or the voice, because you don't learn until the end of the film that Brad Pitt was just a metaphorical version of Ed Norton. He actually wasn't real or tangible, but he was so palpable because his ruminations and the voice and the wolf was so powerful in his head that it was disguised as the sheep, and the viewers during the entire movie thought it was actually another person and another character. Till
the very end.
That's right. So
what a trip out of a movie.
Yeah. So that will help people know what I'm talking about. And it's a really interesting topic because it's another issue that I often diagnose and come across in real estate is this issue of mental health.
Yep.
And I don't know why. I'm still trying to figure out whether does the industry make us suffer from mental health, or does the industry attract people who are either OCD or A-type personalities who already have high anxiety or potentially depressing thoughts? Does the industry attract those type of people? I haven't quite worked that out yet, but I do know that probably at least half of the people that I work with have some sort of mental health issues. That's a huge amount in the industry, right?
Yeah.
And I do feel that I'm equipped, I wouldn't say qualified because I don't have the qualification, but I'm certainly equipped and know enough about it to have helped a lot of people through that journey. And that's something that I would also call a career highlight, where I've literally talked people out of suicide. So that's something that's very rewarding as well.
So let's flip it then. Instead of your career highlight, let's talk about your worst day in real estate, whether it be the controversy or whatever it may be. What's the worst day in real estate you've had, and how did it affect your mental health, and how did you overcome it?
Look, I'd have to say when a certain event was very well publicised and all over the Daily Telegraph, and there was photographers out the front of my house for weeks, and just waiting for you to go for a walk with the dog, and literally knocking on your door asking for a comment. And I mean that wasn't great, I'll be honest with you. It was a very dark time, and sure, my mental health and that wolf came out again, there's no doubt about it, and was saying all the wrong things, and but I got out of it because I focused on the Stoic philosophy, which is I can't control what's happened. I know that I didn't do anything wrong, and the people who care, who I care about, knew that, right? And I just put one foot in front of the other and focused on doing really good work, whether it was sales, whether it was coaching, whether it was advising. And then 1 week turned into a month, turned into a year. And then the irony is that News Corp own the Daily Telegraph, and they also own Sky News. So I went from...
Which you're still on, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I went from being, vilified in the press to now, by the same entity, being weekly as a real estate spokesperson nationally. You know what I mean? So I love that irony.
Loves how it comes full circle, right?
But that doesn't just happen, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't just happen. That means you've got to get up every day. You've got to put one foot in front of the other. You've got to not focus on what you can't control, only focus on what you can control. And also have the appropriate interpretation of that event. So it's not, 90% of life is not what happens to you, it's how you interpret it. What does it mean? What are you going to do about it? What's the opportunity there? Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, I think that hopefully that answers your question. And but the good thing is I've actually got zero bad blood about any of that period of time, even though there were some bad actors involved. I actually speak to them all today, and there's just no issues. It was really no one's fault, apart from, that at that particular moment in time, people had certain agendas and made certain decisions, and there was a bigger sort of target at stake at that particular time, and I unfortunately got in the way, and
you're in the crossfire.
That's just life, right? Life ain't fair. Life is life. That's I've said a few times today. So, but to say that it didn't affect me is not true. To say that it wasn't a dark time is not true. And I've publicly said before that I literally was in bed for 2 weeks. But only 2 weeks, where a lot of people,
everyone
they
could
shell.
They wouldn't be able to get out of it.
Well, you've only got to walk. We're in the CBD here. By the time you walk back to your car or your form of transport, you will see homeless people.
Yeah.
And they were people like you and I at some point. But the wolf took over the sheep. Something bad happened in their life, whether it was financial, marital, business, whatever. And unfortunately, the wolf took over the sheep in their head, and that voice took over, and now they're homeless and maybe addicted to drugs or alcohol, whatever it might be. So it's actually not that hard to get to that point if you don't control that wolf you know, and because otherwise it'll control you. So you just got to be really careful and make sure that if anything does happen in your life, which it will, adversity will happen, that you have the appropriate interpretation of that and almost budget for it. So the great Stoics budget for adversity all the time. So, you know, Tim Ferriss often talks a lot about, you know, what's the worst thing could happen to me financially? I go broke. So what I'm going to do is eat baked beans for the next 2 weeks, just to see what it feels like to live on baked beans for 2 weeks. And then he does it and he comments that, you know what, it wasn't that bad. Right? So he's actually conditioning himself and preparing himself, you know, and Tim Ferriss is one of the great Stoic philosophers, as is Ryan Holiday in the modern time anyway. So, yeah, it's interesting. But, no, I hope that answer has helped people. But because, you know, the worst thing could happen to you and it's only the worst thing if you label it as that, right? So one thing I've learned after 52 years on this planet and 35 years in this industry is life is full of outcomes, but it's never the final outcome. It's just one outcome which leads to another outcome, right? So there's an old fable which is, this will help explain that, and it'll only go for a second, but it's like, you know, this farmer had some horses on his property and they were working horses, so they were helping him make a living. And one of the horses bolted off and the neighbour said to him, "Oh, that's terrible. Well, what are you going to do?" And he said, "We don't know yet. Let's see what happens." So a few days later, the horse comes back with 3 other horses, right? And even more horses now to work on the property. And his neighbour said to him, "That's a great thing." And he said, "Well, we don't know yet. Let's see what happens." One of the new horses, the farmer's son, jumped on to try and settle it down, and the horse bucked him off it, and the son broke his leg. And the neighbour said to the farmer, "Oh, that's terrible, isn't it?" He said, "I don't know yet. Let's see what happens." Then in a few months' time, conscription came for the war, and his son avoided going to war, right, because he busted his leg. And the neighbour said, "Oh, that's a good thing, isn't it?" And the guy said, "Well, I don't know. Let's see what happens." And it goes on and on. Do you know what I mean?
It's true.
They're outcomes. Life is full of outcomes, yet we're very, very quick to label them as good or bad.
Yeah.
And I was in that position where when something
Just
bad
too
happened to me,
short-sighted.
I was like, that was a bad outcome. But now I look at it and think, what a great outcome, because it's led to the next one and the next one and the next one and the next one, you know?
You can only connect the dots while looking back. You can't see it
Yeah.
moving forward.
Yeah.
We've got another viewer question here from Benny.
Yeah.
Hi guys, my question is, if somebody asks you for an appraisal as they're selling, but then they decide they aren't quite ready yet for any reason, let's just say an example that they have too many personal things happening at the moment, how often would you contact them until they are ready to sell without being too pushy and annoying them?
Yeah.
Also, what would you talk about each time you contact them until they decide to sell? Cheers, Ben.
Okay, great question. So firstly, you still do the appraisal. So if someone says, "Look, I don't want to waste your time, Adrian, you know, I'm not looking to sell, but sure, I'd be delighted to get an updated opinion of value," great, you certainly do it. I mean, I've met agents who say, "Look, I don't do price checks, I only do listing appointments." I think that's an erroneous decision. I don't think that's going to be a good decision. Sure, if you've evolved into a super team and you've got very qualified associates that are capable of doing that, that's great. But as you're developing, you should definitely attend that appointment. Now, in terms of what's the frequency of contact and what's the content of contact, that's what the viewer's asking.
Yeah.
I genuinely believe that it really depends on what the conversation was like at that listing appointment. So let's say the conversation is, "Look, as I said, I didn't want to waste your time. I'm not really looking to sell, but look, my husband has been offered a job transfer, and look, it's not really anything that we're thinking about seriously at the moment, but you know, you just never know." To me, that's that could literally be a property that comes on the market in 3 or 4 weeks or 3 or 4 years. You just don't know. So best practice, in my opinion, is when you're doing a price check and it's not a listing appointment and they're definitely not selling straight away, best practice is handwritten thank you card, right? Best practice is also a phone call within 24 hours just to say, "Hey, I just wanted to touch base to see if I missed anything or if you had any questions that you didn't get an opportunity to ask me when I was at your house yesterday, or if I can assist you with anything further." So a lot of people don't do that part. They just schedule the call for whenever. So I think that's best practice. Next best practice would be establishing through a CRM or through Outlook, whatever type of system you're using. It actually doesn't really matter, because that's probably one of the most common questions I get asked is, what's the best CRM? There is no best CRM. As long as you've got a system, then that's a good one, right? For me, 30 years ago, it was a card box system with, and that worked.
I had that too.
Yeah, and now it's a CRM, but as long as you're adding in brief notes, whether it's Outlook or Agent Box or Locked On, doesn't really matter what it is, as long as you're adding in brief notes saying, look, I've appraised the property at 1.2 million, not immediate seller, however, possibly job transfer, something as simple as that, right? Then you schedule the next contact. After you've made that initial call, you schedule that next contact. I would say the next appropriate one would be 30 days. And in terms of what do you say in that 30-day period, then it's not about scripts or dialogues. It's more about, what's the objective of this call? Okay, so I would rather people follow a list of objectives rather than sticking to a script and dialogue, because I'm not a big fan of scripts and dialogues. You might have heard me talk about this before, because if we all follow the same scripts and dialogues, we're all going to sound the same. Not to mention, our competition is no longer other agents that are calling clients. It's other call centres, and guess what? They're reading off a script and a dialogue, and they're selling electricity or energy or whatever it is, right? So I'd rather have a list of objectives. So objective number one would be a really nice introduction. So saying, hi, it's Adrian Bowe here from XYZ Real Estate, and I had the pleasure of meeting you a month ago. So introduction. Yeah. Second, acknowledge the previous conversation, because what clients don't like is when there's no nexus between the conversations, right? So if you just make that call and say, oh, yeah, I'm just calling, if you decide to sell, that's not going to work. It's like acknowledge and say, Kevin, I understand last time we spoke that, your husband was potentially looking at job transfer. I was actually really thinking about it last night, and I thought, what a great opportunity that potentially could be for you and your family. I was just actually personally curious to see how that progressed, if it did progress at all, right? Oh, thanks for asking, Adrian. It actually fell through, so it's not going to happen. We're going to stay put. Okay, excellent. So, intro, acknowledge conversation. The third thing, what do? Is a result and a story. So a result and a story could be a just listed, just sold. And what's this story in relation to that? You can't tell me that there's not, in the 30-day period, you're not able to come up with a property that's sold or listed near them, either through you or someone else, and there was a story behind it, whether it was a buyer that came from an adjoining suburb, a different state, it went for a X above reserve, there was so many groups through, whatever it might be. Just add value, regardless, even though they're not looking to sell. And then you would go to the next objective on the list, which is, would they want to, based on that story, does that excite you to actually get a price update? Now, in this particular case, you wouldn't have to revisit again unless they actually made capital improvements 30 days. But actually, based on that, did you know that, I know I valued it at 1.2, but I actually think now it's probably closer to 1.3, right? So that's an instant dopamine hit for the client over the phone, with you actually not having to actually visit them again, right? The next objective on your list would be a new note. So job transfer fell through, staying put. And the next objective on the list would be retask or reappoint, which in that particular case for me would probably be 90 days' time, right?
That's right.
And then in 90 days' time, what do? You follow those 6 objectives again. And it's a different conversation every time. Zero script, zero dialogue, just 6 pieces of objectives there, right? And that's how you add value. That's how you build relationships. That's how you nurture data, right? So if I could wave a magic wand for every person listening to this, they should be able to press a button on their CRM, have 30 to 50 calls to make that day that was scheduled either from a week ago or 3 months ago, where you follow those as 6 objectives. I know it works. Why? Because I did it for 30 years straight for 2 hours every single day, as well as manage campaigns, as well as success marketing, right? As well as running a business. So I know it's doable. The only challenge is most people get consumed in one or the other. So it needs to be an and strategy. Prospecting activities need to be an and strategy, not an or strategy. That's where it becomes an issue for people.
Get comfortable in the mundane.
Yeah.
So I've got another one from Lucy Khan. She's actually just asked, how do you think AI will change real estate?
So I think we touched on it briefly. All I feel AI is going to do is make life easier for us, because as I said, the biggest revolution in the 20th century was the internet. What did that do? Just reduce days on market, right? And reduced getting properties live, reduced the days of getting properties live, right? So that made social media, what's that done? It's helped agents boost their profile a lot easier, right? So in the 2020s, obviously we've seen AI now. What's that going to do? Well, it's not going to replace agents. The opposite. It's going to actually educate agents more. It's going to make it easier to write articles about a certain subject. It's probably not great for copywriters, professional copywriters, because that's probably easier to do now. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with professional copywriters. I think if someone attends the property and can walk through and has a really good skill set for writing copy, I think there's still a place for that. But I don't think AI is going to interfere. I don't think it's going anywhere either. It's obviously something that's going to evolve, and it's only going to become more relevant. And I also feel that there will be something that'll happen in the real estate industry that will be quite prolific in terms of AI. I don't know what it is yet.
Yeah.
I mean, Rita seems to be the best AI product out there at the moment, owned by CoreLogic now. And the two main functions of Rita is, one, it can create a daily call list. But again, if you just look at what I just talked about, you actually don't need that unless you've got orphan data, right? If you've got orphan data of 5,000 people that you don't know where to start, I think Rita's a great way to create a call list for you, right? And then the second function of Rita, it creates a daily transcript via SMS to people. So all that's great, but does it replace you calling that client who I appraise and going through those 6 objectives every 3-month period? Or someone who bought a property from you a year ago and calling them 3 times a year and actually touching base with them, in addition to AI connecting with them? I think it needs to be a layered approach. So it will definitely not replace, it'll simply complement what we're doing. But I still think there's something bigger coming. I think Rita's a good first step, but there'll probably be something which will have something to do with buyers. So it could be in your space with buyers agents, where I think that it'll make it a lot easier for buyers to connect with property. So we'll have to see what happens there, but it's not going to replace our roles. There's no question about that. No one can replace that instinct on when to call someone, what to say, be a trusted advisor. Take the emotion out of the negotiation process. That's always going to have that human element involved.
Sweet. So my last question for you, in terms of your coaching, consultancy, and what have you, what type of programs do you offer for real estate agents?
Yeah, good question. So if people go to my website, which is just adrianbo.com, it's all on there. But the most popular modules, I would say, would be a masterclass. So a masterclass is a 2-hour session where effectively you'll walk out of that knowing best practice in all the main pillars of real estate. The main pillars I call database management, prospecting, the listing process, vendor management, buyer work, and personal marketing, right? There's nothing more you need to know apart from that. The best part about that is I'll also act as your accountability coach moving forward once you do that. Another really popular one is an EBU master session, right? So it's really getting the entire EBU in a room and designing in real time swim lanes, job descriptions, clarity, daily accountability, creating an agenda for a work in progress meeting that occurs every 24 hours. Like, I can't tell you how many teams just wing it and are not actually structured enough. So that's really popular. Another really popular one is business advisory. So there are a lot of really good agents who just happen to evolve into business ownership, yet aren't really skilled in that and are therefore a little bit confused around what's my purpose, which we talked about before. What's my highest and best use? Should I be a selling principal or should I be a manager? And if I'm a manager, how do I recruit? How do I retain? How do I create good culture? How do I read a P&L? So often good agents just evolve into business owners without the right type of preparation or education, even though I think some franchises do a reasonable job at it, but not everyone's part of a franchise. They're independent organisations or part of an agent direct model. So, that's an important one for me and a popular one because, I really look at what's your highest and best use and how do you actually run a successful business and or be a successful agent at the same time. So they're the most popular, but there's a whole bunch of stuff. I've got online courses as well. We've just launched a new hub or a new platform, which is great, in collab with Nick Friend. So it's basically a platform of thousands of tools and templates and resources, including lead generation tutorials and whatever you can dream of, which is just a monthly subscription. So if you're an agent or a business owner, you could have all the tools at your disposal, and it's brand agnostic, so it's not, you can just brand it whichever way you want. So that's also on my website. So a whole bunch of stuff, but yeah, I would say masterclasses, EBU, principal advisory are the most common.
And what's the website?
adrianbow.com.
Cool. Beautiful.
Appreciate it. My last question for yourself would be, what advice would you give to your current self now and why?
Current self.
Current self. What advice? Now that I'm equipped with hindsight, you mean?
So you're good at giving advice for others to take. What advice would you give to yourself to take?
That's interesting. Okay.
To Sean White.
So it's a good one. I'd be saying to myself, Adrian, just look at what's in front of you. Don't overwhelm yourself with next week or next year. Let's just live life. Like I was telling people, to live life in sort of yearly compartments. I think at my age, at 52, it's literally indeed be in daily compartments because I could look at my diary for Friday and probably get overwhelmed. So I would say, let's look at in front of you. Live life in daily compartments. I would also say control is an illusion. So when you think that you can control things, you can certainly influence things, but to say, right, next year I'm going to do this amount of sales and my health is going to be this and I'm going to earn X amount of GCI, it's all an illusion because everything's fine till you get punched in the face. And we're all going to get punched in the face, whether it's whatever quality of adversity it is, health, financial, marital, whatever, business, it's coming. So the Stoics just budget for it and just know that it's not the events in your life that matter, it's how you interpret them, and just see things as one outcome and don't be so quick to label it as good or bad. Give it time before you label. It's okay to label it later, but just don't label it straight away because you don't know. It could be a piece of serendipity that could look like a poor outcome, but ultimately is a very, very good outcome. So, or the opposite. Something might seem like a really good outcome, but then later on it becomes a poorer outcome. So just don't label outcomes. The only final outcome is really our mortality, is when we're 6 feet under pushing daisies. There's nothing you can do about that, right? Yeah. And that's coming for all of us as well.
Yeah.
And, Gary Vee was quoted as saying, right, tell me one thing in an interview that he was asked, tell him one thing that's going to motivate the audience. He said, you're all going to fucking die. It's like, wow, that's not very motivating. It was like, well, it's true, so
it's true.
Design a life that feels like it's on purpose for you and it's based on what excites you rather than living a life based on other people's opinions or expectations of you.
Powerful.
That would be my advice to not only myself but to everyone. Yeah.
Love it.
Outstanding. I really
Adrian
appreciate
Bow, thank you.
Absolute pleasure, gents. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
Wow, what a podcast.